Thank you for joining us, especially if you're visiting with us. We're glad that you've chosen to be with us this evening. We're going to sing number 421, Love Lifted Me. We'll sing the first and third verses of that here, and then Paul will teach us here in the auditorium class this evening. We do have classes for all ages down the hall as well. 421. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, from the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Souls in danger, look above, Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by his love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, billows his will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me.
Well, welcome to our class this evening. I hope you picked up the lesson sheets as you came in out in the foyer. If you didn't, raise your hand. Maybe somebody will bring one to you. Yes. I guess we ought to put them at all doors. I guess no. No, they're going to bring you some.
You're out of Zephaniah. Did we need to make a copy? Somebody's copy of Zephaniah?
Yeah. You got one to make a copy with? There you go. Thank you. It's hard to judge how many people, sometimes how many I need, and when Justin started the class, we kind of decreased a little bit, but it looks like I'm going to have to make the same number again. So,
Who else needed one?
did you get them, Marie? Okay. We'll get it sorted out. Well, we appreciate you being here this evening. If you wondered why I was sitting there for so long, I had a sinking spell. I guess it's just part of age, but some days you just get a sinking spell, and I just had to sit down because I knew I was going to need some energy to teach this class. We're on Habakkuk. I had to learn how to pronounce that. I've heard it Habakkuk, Habakkuk. All my life I've heard it different ways, and so I had to learn the Hebrew pronunciation. It's one of those that you have to kind of clear your throat as you say, and kind of an interesting word. And Zephaniah, two short prophets, books, 3 chapters each. Habakkuk has 56 verses and Zephaniah 53 verses, so pretty close in size. Interesting. I don't know why they put them in the order they did. I would have put it Zephaniah and then Habakkuk, because Zephaniah precedes in time Habakkuk. Just a little, they're almost contemporary, but Zephaniah prophesies just a little bit before Habakkuk. So we're going to look at these two books this evening very quickly. Both of them are prophesying against the southern kingdom of Judah. They're in the waning days of Judah. Judah is soon to be judged. God's going to judge them because of their wickedness, their idolatry, and they're going to be carried off into Babylonian captivity. All we know about Habakkuk is there's Habakkuk in Hebrew, but I put it up there for a reason because that name in Hebrew is unknown, basically. And so scholars try to figure out, well, what does that name mean? And so some rabbis have come up with these first three letters of the name, meaning to embrace. And they go back to a passage in 2 Kings 4, verse 16, and I put it in your little news sheet, but you can see the three letters there are the same as in the start of Habakkuk. And I don't know. They say, well, it could mean embrace, but more of the scholars believe that it's a loan word from the ancient Akkadian language, which the Assyrians would have used, and that it means a garden plant. So what does that tell you? It tells you nothing. It tells you nothing. So why have I spent time with? Because if you do any studying, you're going to run across these same things, and you're going to have to weed through it. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't mean anything as far as the book of Habakkuk. And then it gets even more confusing. Habakkuk is the way you put it in Greek. Well, why do I tell you these things? Well, when we first started studying, we said, most of the Old Testament books get their name from the Greek Septuagint rendering of the book. Well, Habakkuk didn't get it from the Greek, did they? It came from the Hebrew. However they got to the Hebrew, that's how it got its name. So, what else do we want to know? Timing. The timing of the book of Habakkuk. The only thing, since we don't know where Habakkuk was from, we don't know who he was, we don't know what his name really means, we just don't know anything about him. Many of the prophets we know something about, but Habakkuk is just an unknown. And so we have to dig into the book to find out, well, when did he prophesy? When did he prophesy? And it appears that he prophesied after the death of Josiah. Now, why do I put all of this stuff up here? Well, there are certain dates in history, biblical history, that maybe we ought to memorize. One of those is 612 BC. That's when Nineveh was destroyed. 612 BC is when Nineveh was destroyed. That was the end of the Assyrian Empire. That's very important, when that was destroyed. 609 BC, another important date. That's when Josiah was killed. Killed by King or Pharaoh Necho from Egypt. You remember in 2 Kings 23 that Josiah decided he would run up and interfere and stop the Egyptians who were on their way up to interfere in some more stuff. And so Josiah took it upon himself and heads up to Megiddo, and he gets killed by Pharaoh. 609 BC. And so that's when Jehoahaz begins his short reign before he is departed to Egypt. Now, between 609 and 605 BC, Egypt held sway over the southern kingdom. That's before the Babylonians come in. Can you remember all of this? Well, some of it you can, if you make an effort to. Remember that date, 612. Remember 609, when Josiah dies. Remember 609 to 605 BC. Now, how do you remember all of that? I didn't put it on here, but 605 BC, it says the Babylonians invade Judah and take captives. That's when Daniel and his 3 friends get hauled off to Babylonian captivity. But something very important happened in 605 BC. That's when the Battle of Carcamish. It's mentioned in the Bible. Google it, Carchemish, Carcamish, the Battle of Carcamish. Very important battle. That's when Egypt, well, you remember old Pharaoh Necho that killed Josiah? He's heading up there in 609 BC. He finally gets up to the Battle of Carcamish in 605 and gets defeated. And when he gets defeated, Egypt loses its sway over the southern kingdom, and that's when the Babylonians come down and basically take the southern kingdom, the start of captivity. They come in basically 3 times. 605 BC, 598 BC, and 586 BC is when they destroyed Jerusalem. Yes, right.
I have 2 questions.
I only answer one. No.
So-
Oh, wait. Well, we don't have a microphone, so I'll repeat it maybe.
Okay. When they took Jehoahaz to Egypt,
Yes.
was the southern kingdom subject to Egypt at that time, but not in captivity?
They were not in captivity, but they pretty much,
He had their king.
yeah. He pretty much controlled them, yeah.
Okay, so then the second question is, when Nineveh was destroyed there in 612, do we know how long after that was, after Jonah that was?
How long after Jonah? Well, Jonah would have been in the 8th century, about 750 BC. So we're talking about 125 years or so. And of course, then it was based upon Nahum's prophecy. Yeah. Wow, man. Yeah, it is hard to keep up with all this stuff. It really is. And the only reason I can remember a lot of it was I fixed the Battle of Carcamish in my mind. And when I figured out what the Battle of Carcamish did, that was the end of the Assyrians. They were struggling. And the Egyptians and the Assyrians were trying to repel the Babylonians and the Medes. And it was settled at Carcamish. And that ended Egypt as far as a dominant power in the Middle East. They had to go back to Egypt, and that's basically where they stayed. So then we get back to Habakkuk. Probably 609 to 605 BC, somewhere in there, is probably when Habakkuk was active in his prophecy. probably. But it's before the Babylonians came in and really wreaked havoc on the nation. So, again, based upon some things he says in there, that's kind of how they come to that conclusion. So let's look at the outline. Basically, this is an unusual prophecy because it's basically a conversation between the Lord and Habakkuk. And Habakkuk's got some questions. Well, let's just look and see what he says here. And maybe we've asked some of these same questions before. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. He wants to know, Lord, when are you going to stop all this foolishness that's going on? When are you going to intervene? And so the Lord answers him, look among the nations and watch, verse 5, be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. For indeed I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation. So see, the Chaldeans hadn't come yet. They had not interfered into Judah at that time. They've been worried about the Egyptians. They had just gotten rid of the Assyrians. Now they're worried about the Egyptians. And the Lord says, look, the Babylonians are the ones that are going to come in. And you can imagine Habakkuk's probably thinking, I don't understand this, Lord. I just don't understand it. So then he has another question, beginning in verse 12. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O rock, you have marked them for correction. You are pure eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Now Habakkuk said, look, Lord, I know we've kind of messed up, but these Babylonians are worse than we are. Why are you using evil Babylonians to punish your people? Do we ever ask questions like that? Lord, how long are you going to let this nation go on like it is? How long are you going to let the evil people... Yes?
Doesn't this sort of remind you a little bit of how God in the New Testament uses unrighteous... Doesn't this remind you how in the New Testament God uses unrighteous folks to carry out his plan when they killed his son?
When they
killed Christ. They would have never done all that knowing that's what God wanted them to do as part of his plan. You know, in the Old Testament, he uses unrighteous, evil folks. I think inherent in that question is the comparison of us versus somebody else instead of us versus what God's trying to get us to. And so, yes, they're better than the Babylonians, but the Babylonians are instrumental in getting the children of Israel to mend their ways, to change the direction they're going.
And like you said, many, many times God has used evil nations to punish his people. He did it many times throughout the Old Testament. And so here is this prophet, and he's having this conversation with God, and basically God, he gives him the answer. He says, I'm going to take care of it. But hey, look, the Babylonians aren't getting away with anything. I'm going to punish them. They're going to get what they deserve. I'm going to take care of it. Habakkuk, you just need to live by faith, trust in me, and I'm going to take care of things. And so he gets down into chapter 2, and he pronounces these 5 woes. Well, let's go here. Why does God not respond to the wrong and injustice in the land? He's fixing to do it with Babylon. Why does he use his wicked Babylonians? That's God's plan. And they're not going to get away with anything. So he has these 5 woes. And why did I put those up? I read these 5 woes. Are they not things that are still a problem today? Now, I doubt, I hope, no one at Walter Hill is selling stolen goods, and that's the way I hope there's nobody at Walter Hill doing that. I trust there's not. I can't imagine that, but anybody ever stolen anything? We don't have to have confession tonight. Woe to those who live by bloodshed and violence. Still got a lot of that going on. But look at this one. Woe to those who disgrace others. Maybe not intentionally, but you ever embarrass somebody? And then finally he says, woe to those who worship idols. And I know we're fast to say, we don't worship idols today. Oh, yeah, we do. Oh, yeah, we do. We got all kinds of them. Money, cars, clothes, sports.
TV.
Well, Barbie, you're just going to list them all, aren't you?
Handheld devices.
Handheld devices, yep. I mean, we've got them. So the point is, I think these 5 woes are something we need to look at and just think about every once in a while. But I love the way he closes with, woe to those who worship idols. And what's next? But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Don't you love that verse? The Lord is in his holy temple. I think I could get to preaching right now, but I'm not. But turn with me to Psalm 11. One of the things that I've worried about for years is reverence towards God. And everything that I read and study about the holiness of God and coming into his presence demands reverence. Demands reverence. Now, when we say the Lord is in his holy temple, what does that mean? Psalm 11, verse 4. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold. His eyelids test the sons of men. His throne is in heaven. When we come into God's presence, although he dwells in our midst, he is still in heaven, so high above us, and he demands reverence. That's my sermon for the end of Habakkuk. And then he goes into chapter 3 with a prayer. And it's a prayer in the form of a psalm, a very beautiful psalm. I'll just ask you to take time and go read the 3rd chapter of Habakkuk. A beautiful prayer. And I think it's a prayer that's issued when Habakkuk gets his answers and he realizes he needs to talk to God. And he writes this beautiful psalm. Evidently, it was a psalm that could be sung. So some think that Habakkuk may have been a priest, part of the priestly tribe. And so he would know about the music and things like that for psalms in worship. That's just conjecture. Any comments about Habakkuk before we go to Zephaniah? We got 9 minutes to get Zephaniah. All right, let's get Zephaniah. Another short book, 53 verses, as I said. Spanya. That doesn't even sound like Zephaniah, does it? And then we go to the Greek, Sophonius. Well, that kind of sounds a little bit like Zephaniah, but I don't know that it means anything. But what does Zephaniah mean? Well, when you have an IAH at the end of these names, it has to do with Yahweh or Jehovah. And well, I just went on to that. That's okay. We'll go on to the outline. But Zephaniah, he evidently was one of the only prophets with royal ancestry. He was the great-great-grandson of Hezekiah. Now, some have argued, well, it's not King Hezekiah, but I think more scholarly debate goes to him being the great-great-grandson of King Hezekiah. And so he would be related to Josiah, who he's prophesying under. He prophesies under the reign of Josiah. In the 1st chapter, he pronounces a judgment, or the Lord pronounces a judgment against Judah. And one of the reasons it's pronounced is because of idolatry. Idolatry in Jerusalem. So most people think that he was prophesying before Josiah instituted his reforms. You remember Josiah kind of cleaned up the idolatrous stuff there in Judah. He was a good king. He initiated his reforms in 622 BC, so they kind of figure maybe about 625 BC is when Zephaniah was making his prophecies under Josiah, because it was before the idolatry was removed. So he's condemning the idolatry, and so that's why they think it was before Josiah's reforms. So put it in 625 BC. It's also before the destruction of Jerusalem, because he's really going to hit this later. He talks about the day of the Lord. And he talks about that day, the day of the Lord, the day. I think I counted some 23 times. He uses it the most of any prophet, the day of the Lord. Judgment is coming. The Lord is going to take judgment. It's near. He's not talking about the end of time. He's talking about judgment on Judah and Jerusalem. And basically he said Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. It is going to be destroyed. To a Jew, the destruction of Jerusalem was, man, it doesn't get any worse than that. But he predicts all of this. He also hits these other nations, the Philistines, Moab and Ammon, Cush or Ethiopia, and Assyria. So Assyria is still in power. Remember, they don't get destroyed. Nineveh gets destroyed in 612 BC, so we know it's before that. And Jerusalem, 586 BC, so it's before that. The good news is a remnant. There's going to be a remnant, and that's the good news. So, what can we get out of all of this about this judgment and the day of the Lord? It appears that the day of the Lord was not to, it was judgment, and he was going to wipe out the evil practices. He was going to punish Judah, but there was a remnant. And so maybe the message is that God used that day of the Lord as a method of purification of his people to get it cleaned up, and then there would be a return of the scattered people, this remnant, and there would certainly be rejoicing for that. Zephaniah, I don't know much more to say about that, because it's all about the day of the Lord. That's the whole thing, is all this judgment. And if you read through it, it's really pretty easy to read. Zephaniah is pretty easy to read as you read all these judgments against these people, what he's going to do to them. Although it sounds like the end of the world's coming, if you read real closely, very closely, you'll see he's really honing in on Jerusalem. So many think that Zephaniah was from Jerusalem. In chapter 1 and verse 4, I believe. Let me find it. It's kind of funny how they find some of these clues as to meaning. I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I will cut off every trace of Baal from this place. And because he uses that description, many scholars believe that Zephaniah was from Jerusalem because he calls it this place. Evidently he was there, and so he calls it this place. I don't know. We just don't know any more about him. But if he was from the royal family, it would make sense maybe that he would be from Jerusalem. And that's all I've got. Any comments, questions?
One quick question.
Okay. Oh, hold on. You got a quick mic.
This is a New King James Version. At the end of Habakkuk, it says, "To the chief musician with my stringed instruments." Now, I know that that's not inspired, but you're a scholar, and just in your opinion, how much value do you,
Well,
I mean, how close is that to accurate, do you know?
Those annotations are found, and so that they're pretty much, now that you mentioned that I'm going to digress very quickly, because a lot of the Psalms have similar annotations for musical direction, and so they become part of it. Let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Hold on just a second. If you go back to Habakkuk, chapter 3, and it says a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. And if you look at exact meaning unknown, well, the musical direction they've come up with is that means like a drunk man. In other words, it has a lot of energy in it. Did that answer your question? I don't know, but these musical directions are something that have to be taken into consideration, just like Selah.
So they're like historically accurate, so that's what I'm asking. This is not some.
Yeah, it's not something, yeah, no, it's a scholarly thing. But I will try to answer you better next week. How's that? Yeah.
There are places where the text talks about, in their worshiping, the instrumental sorts of things in the actual text itself, so.
Yeah, it's something we can't disregard. We may not understand it all, but we can't disregard. Yeah, we just don't know exactly what all it meant. I guess that's the best explanation, but I'll try to answer it better next week.
There's some stuff like in the preface of the book too that's just commentary.
Yeah. We'll try to answer it better next week. How's that, Brian? Thank you.
In preparation for the Lord's Supper, we're going to sing number 645, The Old Rugged Cross. We'll sing the first 3 verses of this song. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross.